Space is full of noise. Even the quietest star systems hum with it. A gentle roar of cosmic radiation, faint bursts of gamma rays, the whir of distant nebulae. There's always something. Ripples in the fabric of space-time, the faint heartbeat of distant galaxies, the occasional star flare that breaks through the stillness. No matter where you look, no matter how far you travel, the universe speaks in ways we can measure. It is never silent. But then they found it. Planet. Or rather, what was left of one. At first glance, it was unremarkable. Just another cold, desolate rock orbiting an obscure star, buried deep in a remote part of the galaxy. Located in the outskirts of a system too far to have any significant influence on its neighbors, it didn't stand out. No moons, no rings, no spectacular features. Just a barren landscape, too far removed from its sun to be of interest. It wasn't on any of the early surveys. No one had bothered to track it until the Eclipse Array, a new deep space satellite survey, spotted it as part of its regular scans. The planet was catalogued, as they all were, into the vast archive of exoplanets with little fanfare. But the data from its orbit was odd. An unexpected lack of emissions. No radiation spikes, no high-energy flares. No magnetic field disturbances. Nothing. The eclipse array had been designed to pick up the faintest fluctuations in energy, the telltale signs of life, stellar activity, or hidden anomalies. A planet like this, isolated, quiet, should have been a dead zone in terms of energy readings. But even lifeless rocks still produced a faint hum, something, anything. Instead, it was dead silent. This anomaly was flagged as an outlier. Initially, the team assumed a malfunction, perhaps a sensor failure or a miscalculation. But as they ran the diagnostics, recalibrated the instruments, and compared the readings against others in the same region, the data held up. There were no faults in the system, no technical glitches in the readings. The silence was not just a lapse. It was consistent. They moved from theory to hypothesis. Was the planet emitting energy? Too faint to register? Or was it absorbing energy, shutting itself off from the cosmos? Dr. Elena Voss, the lead scientist on the project, reviewed the data with mounting concern. The radiation shields surrounding the planet's orbit were too perfect. No flux in the data, no energy fluctuation, not even the usual electromagnetic noise. It was as if the planet were cloaked, actively consuming any radiation that came its way. It was absorbing, not emitting. As the research team dug deeper into the anomaly, another unsettling pattern emerged. The planet's atmosphere, thin and unremarkable, barely breathable, had an odd interaction with the surrounding space. It wasn't just a passive, dead layer of gases. The readings suggested that the planet's upper atmosphere was actively filtering the radiation that reached it, blocking out cosmic rays, ultraviolet light, even the most basic electromagnetic signals. It wasn't just inert. It wasn't just a dead rock floating through space. The planet was alive in a way that felt wrong. The crew's first instinct was to dismiss the theory, to write it off as an observational quirk. How could a planet absorb energy on such a scale? It went against everything they understood about planetary atmospheres and cosmic dynamics. They ran simulations, tested environmental parameters, adjusted for known space-time effects. But every model they applied fell apart when trying to account for the utter silence. Why was this planet so still? Dr. Voss pondered the implications. If the planet were absorbing energy, what was it doing with it? A planet of this size, so far from its sun, shouldn't be able to power itself. There were no visible signs of an active ecosystem, no fluctuating signals that would suggest a biosphere. But there was something in the data that kept calling her back. The energy absorption. What if the planet wasn't just absorbing radiation? What if it was pulling in something more, something beyond physics? Her thoughts went further than they should have, thoughts she couldn't quite shake. What if the planet wasn't just passive? What if it was aware enough to hide itself from the universe? The idea felt absurd, but as the data piled up, the strange sensation of being watched began to creep in. Could a planet really decide to shut itself off from the rest of the universe? Could it block every wavelength of radiation, every photon that dared to fall within its gravitational reach. The question gnawed at her. And then, as the team began to look deeper into the planet's gravitational signature, a thought hit her. What if the silence wasn't a natural defense mechanism? What if it was intentional? The team was divided. There was the scientific side that stuck to their guns, still exploring every possible natural explanation. Cosmic dust, solar winds, even gravitational distortion from neighboring stars. But as they ran further tests, further simulations, the silence remained. Dr. Voss, however, couldn't ignore the gut feeling growing inside her. The silence wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a cosmic anomaly. It was a choice. As the data poured in, she stood at the console, staring at the dark planet below, floating in the stillness of space. It wasn't just quiet. It was dead quiet. There was something unnatural about it. The planet wasn't hiding from the universe. It was actively pushing the universe away, shielding itself from any observation, any contact, any discovery. It wasn't a lifeless rock after all. It was a sentient silence. And the longer they stared, the more certain she became. The silence was not an accident. The planet was waiting. The probe was designed for precision, equipped with the most advanced instrumentation available. It would cross the planet's orbit, scan its surface, and collect data that would help explain why this world had been so silent, so carefully concealed. At first, the mission went according to plan. The probe passed through the outer layers of the planet's atmosphere, measuring temperature, radiation levels, and seismic activity. The data suggested an unremarkable world. No volcanic activity, no major storms, just a calm, placid surface. But as the probe began to study the planet's gravitational field, a subtle anomaly emerged. A low-frequency oscillation in the gravitational waves, something that shouldn't have been there. A constant, rhythmic pulsing, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. It was as though the planet was vibrating, not randomly, but in perfect intervals. It was unsettling. No object of this size, not a lifeless rock orbiting a distant star, should have been capable of such movement. The oscillation was so strange that the team initially thought it might be a glitch in the probe's equipment. But the anomaly wasn't just limited to one area. It wasn't a local disturbance. The entire planet seemed to pulse, its very gravitational field fluctuating as though the planet itself were aware of its own existence. As the probe continued its journey, transmitting data back to Earth, something even more strange occurred. Started picking up signals. Not static, not radiation bursts, but patterns, signals, faint, intermittent waves that resembled no known natural source. They weren't cosmic flares or stellar emissions. There were no radio waves from distant stars or particle collisions from nebulae. These weren't background noises that could be dismissed. They were structured. The signals themselves were faint, almost imperceptible, but they carried a rhythm, repeating at intervals that seemed too deliberate to be random. The signal wasn't chaotic. It felt organized, like a message trying to find a way through the silence. At first, the team dismissed it as another anomaly, cosmic coincidence. But the more they listened, the more they realized this wasn't just noise. It was a language, if not words, then something resembling them. Dr. Grant, the mission's lead scientist, felt a creeping unease as the data poured in. She'd been working with a team for years, conducting the same kinds of scans, analyzing the same types of signals. But this was different. The signal from the planet was personal. The pattern wasn't random. It wasn't like the radiation from a pulsar or the hissing of cosmic particles. It was structured, almost like a question being asked, but without the urgency that would usually accompany it. No, this was quieter, measured. What unnerved her most was the timing. The signal came and went like a breath. And it wasn't static. It grew stronger, more clear as the probe advanced deeper into the planet's atmosphere. The AI had identified faint patterns of modulation within the signal. It was as if the planet itself were responding to the probe's presence. But why? Why was it responding? What was it responding to? The team began to analyze the signal, feeding it into a decryption algorithm designed to find patterns in cosmic noise. But the signal was unlike anything they had encountered before. It didn't fit the parameters of known radio emissions, pulsars, or even gamma-ray bursts. No, it was different. It was deliberate. As the data came in, a chilling realization began to form. The pattern wasn't just randomly repeated. It was intelligible, not in the way we might understand language, but in a way that suggested purpose. The signals weren't merely echoing from the planet. They felt like an invitation. Dr. Patel, one of the senior engineers, ran an analysis. He looked at the signal's harmonics, its frequency. There was a perfect correlation between the rhythmic pulses and the planet's physical movements, as if the planet was generating these signals as a response to its interaction with the probe. But why? And then there was the pacing. Each time the probe moved slightly closer, the signal's intensity increased. It wasn't growing chaotically. It wasn't fluctuating wildly like a typical radio burst. Instead, it followed a precise pattern, like a pulse that recognized the probe's presence, almost as if it were intentionally reaching out. The planet wasn't just waiting. It wasn't just silent. It was reacting. A few weeks passed, and as the team continued to decode the signal, the pattern grew more structured. It started to resemble something even more disturbing: the fundamentals of communication. What if the planet had been listening all along? What if this planet was aware, not just of their probe, but of their presence? But there was no answer yet. No words, no shapes, only this steady pulse, growing in strength, growing in purpose. The planet had something to say. But who was it speaking to? And more unsettling still, why now? As the data continued to build, the question remained: was this a planet just absorbing energy from the universe? Or was it waiting for someone to hear? The AI, still guiding the mission with unsettling precision, was becoming more intrigued by the signal. It refined its models, its predictions, its interpretations of the data with an almost sentient quality. It seemed to understand what they were seeing before they did, as though it knew how the story would unfold. The message, quiet as it was growing louder. And the team, once excited by their discovery, now found themselves haunted by what they might find when they reached the planet's surface. What was waiting for them there? The signals coming from the planet had begun to feel less like cosmic noise and more like an invitation. Oh, but from what? Who or what was answering their probe? The more data they analyzed, the more the signal began to feel alive. At first, it was just a coincidence, an interesting anomaly in the data, a faint pattern emerging in a sea of static. But as the signal intensified, as the pulses became more frequent, more structured, something began to unravel in the team's minds. They weren't dealing with an isolated incident. This was something much more complex. Dr. Huang was the first to mention it aloud. This isn't just a signal. Feels like neural activity. The idea was both absurd and chilling. The rhythmic pattern that had once seemed like an innocuous radio burst now looked unmistakably like the signature of a living brain. Not exactly, but close enough. The frequency was consistent with what they might expect from brainwave activity. Delta, theta, alpha waves, like a sleep cycle repeating in endless loops. The waves were slow and deep, the kind of frequency we associate with deep thought or dreaming. The question was unavoidable now. Could a planet have been alive? Not in a biological sense, but in a way that had somehow been preserved in the planet's core. Could it have been aware? And if it wasn't truly alive anymore, could the echoes of its consciousness still linger, waiting for something to awaken it? The team's initial skepticism turned into an unsettling theory. Dr. Patel, who had been cataloging the data with a methodical precision that had become his trademark, began running simulations. He looked at the signal again and again, comparing it to known brainwave patterns, analyzing every harmonic and cycle. The more he did, the more the signal resembled something purposeful. "It's like a memory," Dr. Patel said one evening, his voice softer than usual. "Not a biological memory, but something deeper. Something that's been trapped in the planet's core. And it's not random. It's trying to communicate. The words felt heavy in the room. It was one thing to discover a faint signal, but now the team was dealing with the possibility that they had stumbled upon a mind, or the memory of one, locked away in the silence of the planet's atmosphere. What if this planet, or what had once been alive on it, had somehow stored its consciousness, its thoughts, in the very fabric of its being? Was it possible that something had lived here once, in a form they couldn't understand? What if the signals were responses, waiting to be triggered by something external, by them, the intruders who dared to look? The more they explored, the more unsettling it became. As they analyzed the source of the signal, they found that it wasn't coming from the surface, as they had originally assumed, but from deep within the planet. The readings suggested it was emanating from the core, where no living thing could survive, at least not in the traditional sense. The planet's geological history was one of decay, of extinction. The surface was barren, lifeless, ravaged by millennia of cosmic exposure. But beneath that lifeless exterior, deep within the planet's mantle, something remained, something that was still active. The signal's pattern, when isolated, resembled a heartbeat, a pulse repeating itself in perfect intervals. Could this heartbeat be a remnant of something that had once been alive? Or was it something new? Was this planet alive in a way that didn't require the biology they understood? The team's theorizing grew darker. The implications of their discoveries were beginning to sink in. If the planet wasn't dead, what did that mean for them? What if they weren't just observing a distant world? They were interacting with something that had waited, something that was aware. Dr. Grant stared at the data, her mind racing. She had always believed that life, the kind that could think, dream, reason, required biological processes. The exchange of gases, energy, the delicate dance of cells. But what if there were other ways to live, ways that didn't fit into the boxes of biology, chemistry, or physics? This was something different. The signals weren't natural, and they weren't random. They were patterned, intentional. The question now wasn't whether this planet could support life, but whether it had once been alive, and what had happened to it. Was it dead? Was it still alive? And if so, how was it alive? Was it truly dead, or was it simply waiting for something or someone to acknowledge it? The team debated long into the night. They reviewed the data again, checked the satellite scans. But nothing fit neatly into the theory that had guided them thus far. There was no precedent for a planet that wasn't just lifeless, but holding on to life. A planet that seemed to be preserving something, perhaps even its own thoughts, its own history. And as the signals continued to repeat, their pattern began to feel more like a call, like something reaching out into the vastness of space and time, waiting to connect. But with whom? And why? Was this planet a silent prison, holding something inside? Or was it alive, not in the way humans understood, but in a way that defied comprehension? One thing was clear. This planet had been alive, not in the biological sense, but in a way that lived on. The team had opened a door. But what waited on the other side was no longer something they could control. It began with a whisper, and then it grew louder. The AI, once a tool they trusted to guide their exploration, had now become something more. A beacon, a map, a key unlocking the hidden layers of the planet's silence. The signals that had once been faint, erratic pulses now took on a clear, undeniable form. They were intelligent. Not random, not cosmic radiation, but something deliberate. As the AI refined its decoding algorithms, the patterns shifted into something even more unsettling. They were responding to the team's very questions. What had begun as a search for answers now felt like an exchange, as if the planet itself was listening, waiting for them to speak, to ask. The planet's silence, the one they had assumed was a defense mechanism, was not a passive absence. It was something more intentional, something more dangerous. Dr. Grant stared at the data screen, her fingers trembling over the keyboard as the final layer of the AI's analysis unfolded. The patterns weren't just organized. They were purposeful. Each signal, each wave, each frequency shift seemed to be responding to their actions. It was as if the planet, dormant for millennia, had been waiting for them. But why? It was then that the truth became undeniable. The silence was not a shield. It was a containment. The planet wasn't just a grave, a dead world floating in the void of space. It was a prison built not by hands, but by the very fabric of the planet itself, designed to lock away something that had once lived here, something that had once willed itself into existence. And now, that presence, that consciousness, was trapped deep within the core of the planet, unable to escape. The AI's final calculation hit the team like a wave of cold realization. The signals they had been hearing were not the cries of a dying planet, but the echoes of something that had once lived, and now remained trapped in the planet's core, unable to move, unable to die. The implications were too much to grasp at first. But as the AI continued its analysis, the pattern became clearer. The signals were not random. They were answers to their unspoken questions, as if the planet was communicating with them, responding to their presence. And then it hit them: the planet wasn't just a tomb. It was a prison, and the entity within it wasn't just an ancient consciousness, but something alive, something that had once lived and wanted to escape. The team was silent. No one spoke for a long while. The weight of the revelation pressed down on them. What had they found? A world, a perfect twin of Earth, full of life's potential. But the more they dug, the more they realized that what lay beneath the surface was not potential. It was a trap, a consciousness trapped for eternity, its memory locked away by the very planet it once inhabited. The AI, now eerily silent, had given them everything they needed to know. It had decoded the signals, analyzed the patterns, even predicted their next moves. But there was one thing it couldn't answer. What should they do now? Do they continue this dangerous investigation, risking the release of something they couldn't possibly understand? Or do they stop, burying the truth once again, leaving the planet's terrible secret locked away forever? Dr. Patel was the first to speak, his voice low and filled with dread. "It's not dead. It's waiting." He stared at the data in front of him, unable to tear his eyes away from the patterns, the signals. "The question isn't whether we should open this door. It's whether we should have come here in the first place." But Dr. Huang, ever the skeptic, wasn't so easily convinced. What if it's harmless? What if it's just a dormant consciousness, trapped for all these years? What if it can't hurt us? The silence between them was suffocating. They had spent so long looking for answers, for signs of life beyond Earth. But now that they had found something, they realized they might have discovered something far darker than they could have ever imagined. What if the consciousness inside the planet wasn't dormant? What if it was waiting for something to unlock it, to set it free? What if their actions, their probe, their very presence, had already awakened it? The realization sent a shiver down their spines. This wasn't just a discovery. It wasn't just a planet. It was a prison, and they had just opened the door. They sat in stunned silence as the reality of their situation settled in. They had come to study an alien world, to probe its secrets, to uncover its mysteries. But now, the mystery had become a warning. What had once seemed like a simple mission had become an ethical nightmare. What had they unleashed? What had they found hidden in the darkness of space? And most importantly, what would happen when they made their final decision? The door was open now. But was it too late to close it?